The Design Ops Aligned podcast is brought to you by Workpage. Stop wasting weeks building the wrong thing. Workpage shows who's misaligned before they start building. Catch problems in minutes, not after launch.
Welcome everyone to season 3 Design Ops Aligned podcast, the final season of the Design Ops Aligned podcast. I can see some regular faces who have been on the show, and I am glad they are back on again to talk about a very, very, how should you say, sensitive subject that has been in our field for a while. And I'm really glad both of them have taken it upon themselves to really flush this out, and I'm glad you're both back on the show. So welcome Mel and welcome Javier. So
thanks for having us.
Thank you. It's amazing to be here.
What do you mean by the last season? Is it like,
it's the
are you planning?
Season. It's the final season of the Design Ops Aligned podcast, just to let you know. So
why is that?
We could take this off offline, but I think it's time now. I think I've done it. I've enjoyed it, and I've had great opportunities to speak to people like yourself. And I wanted to kind of stop before it, before it gets boring, before it's kind of like the same thing again and again and again. So, yeah.
That makes me sad, but congrats on closing things. Because closing things is not always easy.
Yes. It's it wasn't an easy decision, but we'll see. We'll definitely see what the pipeline opens up for us later. So, Mel, Javier, as mentioned, you've been on the show before, but this time you've come on today to talk about this subject that is looming in our field, and it's getting worse, in my opinion, due to the fact of what's happening over the last year with many layoffs that's happening in our industry. So the subject we're going to be discussing is burnout within the UX field. And before I start, I wanted to get your take on why did you two decide on taking on this subject?
Ladies first.
Thank you. No, we are friends and also career coaches, UX leaders. So there's a lot that we're sharing. We have actually a WhatsApp group together with a few others that attend the World Usability Congress. And there was a quite natural conversation happening. And I remember discussing with the team over there, the importance of studying burnout, talking about burnout, the fact that it's a very individual, isolating experience, and there could be some more work to be done to understand it more on the team level, on what it means for UXers at large. There was some debate. Maybe Javier could share more, and he was like, "Yeah, I would be very interested in teaming up with you on that." And I was very, very excited to teaming up with Javier, of course, because we have a lot of values in common, but also a lot of differences in the ways that we approach, challenge each other and learn. So it was pretty much the fact that this was an important topic, and there wasn't much knowledge about it that we could, construct. We can build that awareness by doing research with UXers and share that with the community. And this is a little bit how it took place. Of course, we presented at World Usability Congress, but this is how it all started via WhatsApp conversation.
That's right. Yes. And I think both Mel and I, through our coaching, are confronted a lot with UXers who struggle, right? And obviously it is also connected with layoffs, reorgs, a bunch of other things in the field. But it's clear that when you when you speak with professionals, like there's nobody really doing well, right? There's people who are coping better and worse. But it's not like it's rare that you speak with someone and they go like, I'm having the time of my life, right?
Yeah.
And so in the conversations, we like it would be interesting to learn more about this phenomenon at a holistic level, like aggregating what the field is going through instead of only knowing case by case, like case studies, basically. And so that's how it came to be.
I want to ask you something, because most people who tend to go into something so specified in the field, like something like burnout, have you both ever come across on a personal level? I'm not talking in your professional, in your kind of career advisory roles, but have you ever experienced anyone from a personal level who has experienced burnout?
Yes. I know multiple people who have burnout, have experienced burnout symptoms or complete burnouts, sick leave, long sick leaves, these kind of things. Yes, absolutely.
Same for me. And fun fact, actually, Javier, I don't think I've mentioned it to you before this podcast recording, but I myself have experienced burnout years before. I'm talking about the years of me being an investigative journalist prior to transitioning to UX, and I hadn't had the language of burnout when this happened. So it was an experience of looking back and looking into my symptoms, not individually, but holistically, and realizing, oh, wow, what I had experienced was a burnout. So in that sense, I would say that I've experienced it myself, and also within UX too, I've seen it in people, in colleagues and friends and whatnot.
The reason why I asked that question is because a lot of people tend to say that burnout is not a thing, or burnout is more, okay, let me actually rephrase this question. Burnout tends to be mistranslated as stress. That if you work in a stressful job, this is the norm of the job, and people are kind of mistranslating or mislooking at the way burnout is perceived. So if you're in let me give you an example with that kind of comment. If you work in a high level stress job, it is normal to feel stressed. It is normal to feel that kind of tension, that feeling of doubt and everything as part of that role. Do you think right now people are becoming a bit more aware that stress and burnout are completely two different subjects?
That's a good question. We don't have data for that. My instinct, not based on our research, because we didn't look into the public perception of burnout, is that no, like I don't think the perception of burnout is changing. There are many people who think burnout is either you not being able to cope with stress or not being able to work well. Like we even had that reaction when we proposed the topic for burnout for the conference, when someone in the organization committee said, like, well, is burnout really a thing, or is that just people that don't know how to work, right? So there are people who think that. Interestingly enough, I also know people who thought like that until they had a burnout themselves, and they changed their perception about that. So there's a clear difference between you, and it's also like from a diagnostics perspective, there's a difference, right? So burnout can be diagnosed, right, by professionals, and there are clear dimensions that are defined, which are like emotional exhaustion, like that you feel completely drained, that you can no longer give anything. Then depersonalization, you start to be detached from your work and from your day-to-day life, not only work, family, friends. You stop having the ability to have fun, to enjoy something. You become cynical. And the third is that there is a reduced personal accomplishment. So no matter what you do, right, you never feel satisfied, you never feel effective, you never feel productive, right? And it's those three things that point towards a burnout, right? And that's not what you feel when you're stressed, right? When you're stressed, you have a lot of meetings and you have to deliver a lot of things, right? Maybe you don't sleep well, right? you don't feel those symptoms, right? It's just your stress, right? Because you have a lot of work.
Mhm. I'll definitely agree. And just to add to that, I've even heard once people saying, you're not a candle, you can't burn out. But yes, you can. Like Javier said, is something that clinicians can diagnose. And it's not something where you can say, I'm delivering this project, this week I'm stressed. We're talking about something that isn't directly linked to this one thing you're doing, and there's stress linked to that. And once that's delivered, now you're feeling good, you're engaged, you have agency, you care about what you do, you're in constant motion. It's not like that. It's something that is a lot deeper, and it has a lot of symptoms emotionally, physically, and whatnot. So there's that clear distinction, but maybe something we hadn't studied, that wasn't the main focus of our study. We can talk about that chronic stress, like being constantly stressed, to what degree that links to burnout itself, because clearly, if you're constantly stressed, that might most likely trigger some burnout symptoms. That's something we can pursue, we can understand a little better.
And maybe it can lead afterwards to burnout, right? If you're have this chronic stress, that then later on you might actually move in the direction of a burnout.
Indeed.
I want to delve into something. So you both wrote this really great report. I'm looking at it right now on my other screen. You both put together a very, very thorough investigation and analysis on this, and you spoke to many, many people. Do you want to give me some details on how that report came about, how long it took you, and how many people you actually spoke to define it right now? Mel?
Yes, I'll go first. So, fun fact, maybe we're gonna share information upfront, but Javier and I are also working on a trend report that we're gonna be publishing soon in January. It's not published yet. So those of you that weren't at World Usability Congress or at the webinar that Javier and I hosted, you still have the chance to look into our work. But you're referring to our slides, most likely, the kind of work that we shared at the conference. What we did, thinking out loud here, and Javier, feel free to jump in. We felt like the survey we were gonna run broadly would make better sense. We could ask more relevant questions if we had time spent in interviews with individuals that fit into our criteria, those that have experienced burnout. So at the end of the day, we've held 20 in-depth interviews. These are professionals with different genders, age groups, different seniority levels, living across the world. And that was really, really about understanding, what do you really mean when you say burnout? What experiences you've experienced? Like, what was your work environment like? How did you deal with your burnout? What happened afterwards? That gave us the depth. And the interview, after the interview, the survey was really about understanding if what we've learned scaled to a broader groups of UXers. And that was the second phase of our study. And we had about almost 400 respondents to our survey. So this is where, like, a lot of our answers also had the statistical significance. We were able to speak confidently about some of the learnings that we had.
Yeah, that was perfect. The survey was also multi-country, so across 30 countries, also different roles, all within UX, like in-house agency, freelance, also unemployed people. It was also open to people who did not experience burnout, although the vast majority who answered did experience burnout, because clearly that study pulled in people who had experience with that. But yeah, that's pretty much what we did. And we ran the entire study for about half a year, I think, from the beginning, kickoff planning, until we had everything together. I would say about half a year, yeah.
I would say so, exactly. To be precise, around the end of October is when we had that WhatsApp conversation that we discussed at the beginning. And towards the end of summer was when we were like, okay, the data is here. We're already discussing what it means. We're bringing together. And between summer and this October was when we put together our report.
I'm going to be very, very detailed. I normally never read off notes, but with something like this, very, very sensitive, I wanted to make sure that my questions were correct. Now, one of the key things I found when I was doing my research, and thank you so much for sending me the slides, I really appreciate it. This first question really, really took me Well, it actually was one of the core questions I wanted to ask you both about this report. And I have it written down here. So your data shows workload ranks fourth behind role ambiguity, lack of support, and job insecurity. Yet every burnout conversation defaults to we're doing more with less. Why does the field keep diagnosing the wrong problem? Now, just before you answer that question, it is a common thing what's happening right now in our design industry. We're doing 10 times more with smaller teams. It is a common, I would say it's 99% a common experience I've experienced with people that I've worked with, as well as speaking to people on the podcast and, just speaking to people that are coming in the industry. Can you give me an answer to this one? Do you want me to repeat the question again or repeat the statement again?
No, I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, this is obviously, we know about that. Do you want to go, Meltem? Sure.
Maybe I just share, I have a quick angle, but of course, this is fun that we can debate further with Javier on this. So my first clarification answer to that is workload is still a stressor. So it's not wrong to believe that this is a factor, like this is important and this is what it is. It's fourth, but it's still there. It's still on the list and it shows. It's important to highlight that my take is that when we talk of other factors like the erosion of meaning and emotional overload and things like that, those are harder to quantify, harder to point to, whereas workload is something that we can visibly see. Like someone can look at their Jira board, their tickets, and they can say like, hey, last year today I had 2 tickets pending for this time period and today I have 10. Like that's something so much easier to see. Whereas other bits like, once again, erosion of meaning requires a certain vocabulary. We are able to articulate, be more vulnerable to talk about what's really happening, and it's harder. That's why I think it seems like workload could be a lot more visible. But one thing is being visible and the other thing is being the most important factor. And this is, I think, one of the highlights, one of the key learnings of our work, to say that, okay, yeah, workload is really there, but there's other bits that are also worth paying attention that is technically could be even more important than that. Like the erosion of meaning. It's not about doing more or doing less. It's like you lost that heartfelt connection, that critical engagement with the work that you do. That's also very, very important.
I think to answer your question, right, if the stereotypical way of looking at burnout is I burned out because I worked too much. Right? Like that's what people would say. On the street, you ask anyone, like, who has burnout, they will tell you it's people who work too much, right?
Yes.
But when talking with people who experience burnout, right, these are obviously many of them high achiever that are capable of coping with a lot of work and working long hours, working weekends, and these kind of things. And they even say, I never struggled with that. There were even people saying, like, I even slept in the office, right? I never cared about working a lot, right? It's the combination of working a lot with a bunch of other factors that come in, especially nowadays in UX, that then change the game, right? It's not just working. Like if you work a lot, but there's clear structure, right? There's clear support from upper management. Everyone knows what you're doing and everybody understands the value you're contributing. You do not have to fight for a seat at the table. You do not have to fight for stakeholders to understand your role and what is it that you are contributing and what not, right? You do not have to be afraid to lose your job, right? You don't have to be afraid to be laid off, right? You don't have to go through 10 reorgs because you're laying off all the time, right? And restructuring and reprioritizing and new strategy and all these kind of things, right? So when all of these things come on top of having to work like a horse, right? Then that's when it becomes really dangerous, right? And if you look at our data, right, the data shows that workload was only the 4th factor on the most the most important contributing factors. The first 3 ones were inadequate support from management, role ambiguity, and the situation with a job insecurity and the layoffs, right? So these 3 factors were much stronger, and they're not the typical factors that you attribute to burnout, and they're also not the factors that companies want to hear, right? Because these are things that are under their control, right? Like your manager or your leader, your VP, whatever, like they are in charge for a clear strategy, for stability, to make sure that the roles are defined well, that there is support for what you need for your work, right? And if that's not a given, that leads to you burning out. That's not what I want to hear. It's much easier to say, well, Nash is just not able to cope with a lot of work.
The reason why I chose that question, or I dissected that question as one of my first questions, is because, as you just mentioned, whenever you speak to anyone about burnout, it's always to do with workload. You don't think about the other, how should you say, outer effects of, as you just mentioned, reorg, change of strategy, pivoting, X, Y, Z. And this is a common thing where I think it's not going to get any better, for my opinion. We're going to be having to do way more in this field now. This is just my opinion. Just, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. And I think what's happening.
Well, I can't. This is about the future, so we both don't know. I cannot tell you you're wrong,
True.
right?
Yeah.
But I don't see it that grim, right? I do think it will improve. I don't think it will be like this forever. But right now, that's where we are, right? We have tech laying off people over and over again, which leads to a lot of reorgs, to role ambiguities, to unclear expectations, to people not knowing what UX does, to the value of UX being eroded. And that's the situation right now. I certainly don't hope this will stay like this forever, but we will see, man.
We'll see. And if there's one thing I want people to remember, together with what we've been working on in this question asked, the importance of this revelation is that when we make burnout only about the workload, then the question will switch to time management, or so on and so on. If they are more resilient, it's their individual problem. Maybe they will have a productivity hack or something like that. It could become, no, Javier, some sort of a control mechanism. So then the leadership, tech organizations don't have to take ownership of the situation, because indeed, when we're talking about layoffs and reorgs and offering clarity, a strategy that makes sense and that is stable enough for us to see the results, that's shared responsibility. So indeed, it has different implications, because until this study, at least in the best of my knowledge, indeed, burnout is something that individuals experience alone, with a certain sense of embarrassment, like it's my fault in a way that I went through that. It's like my personal weakness. This came through clearly in interviews and also in the survey. So one of the learnings is really to say that no, it's not really true. Like, of course, part of it is workload and being resilient and finding ways outside of work to anchor yourself and re-energize. But it's also important to mention that, layoffs and reorgs and all that come at a cost. And the cost is the burnout, not of a single individual because they don't know how to manage their time or they're not resilient, but your workforce as UXers.
And I think there is an interesting angle here, which we can discuss, which is like even workload. I mean, companies have managed to make workload an individual problem. Right. So there's a lot of workload. And so it's like your fault because you have bad time management, bad prioritization. You're not resilient. And I remember this also at like being always when the work-life balance ratings were low, right? In the yearly surveys, right? VPs would stand in front of the room because they're like, yes, like we all need to develop better skills to be resilient. There will be this training, this class that you can take, right? And so people that were already stressed out because of too much work, now they had to take a course that was teaching them why they fail, right? Why they are clearly doing a bad job in dealing with this, right? But if you think about it, high workload is at least partly, if not fully, the company's mistake, right? Because you have clearly put too much stuff on people's plate. You have not hired enough, or you have not said no enough to things. And I remember at one time when I was asking the VP in the all hands, saying, I think this is all good, but what would be more helpful is if you actually remove some OKRs. Because if you remove some of the things that we need to do, we will have less workload. And that would be much more impactful. And the VP said, you are right. I'll come back to you, let you know which OKRs I remove. And actually, a couple of OKRs were removed afterwards, that was a really strong leader. It was a fantastic VP. Like I didn't have many of them. Like most VPs wouldn't react that way, but it shows, right, how something that is at least partly also the company's fault is made our fault because we are not strong enough, right?
Exactly. So that's my counter argument with something like Workload. Do you think we are not teaching people to come in the industry to stand up and say no? And say, no, I cannot take this type of work, because it ties into something I also found in your report. You know, we put a lot of attention in the detail. We work pixel perfect. It needs to be the right spacing, blah, blah, blah. You know, this is part of a UX UI designer's kind of trade. And one of the quotes you had in your report is, people who don't care don't get burned out. Meaning that people who don't put the extra effort into the quality and the delivery, you know, are not the ones who are going to get burned out. The people who just kind of just say, yep, I'll ship it, are just basically going to ride life and keep going. Now, it comes down to the fact that of the two things I just mentioned, one, do you think that we're not teaching people to say no, to stick up for their moral values? And two, do you think that UX and UI designers can be too much in the details to make everything pixel perfect to then go through their career? What's your take on my question with that? Mel, I can see you're etching with this. Go for it.
I think me thinking out loud, and this is the part, if we disagree, I think it'll make even a more fun conversation. So my take is that if I go and say in my coaching sessions, in my webinars, in my writing, like, yeah, the answer to everything is to stand up, show up, say no. Sure, but imagine you're a junior person, you spend a year looking for a job, and this is your first UX job. If you lose this job, you don't know what it's going to be like to go back to the job market again. Yeah, this person ethically and so on needs to say no, but I also understand the power dynamic is not of two equals today, unlike maybe some years ago when there were a lot of job openings. And myself, for instance, when I was working as a staff or UX research manager, without being open to work, without looking into jobs, every week at least 4 or 5 recruiters were reaching out to me like, hey, would you be interested in this? Would you be interested? Now it's not like that anymore. So us saying that the answer to everything is to us showing up and saying no is not the answer itself. What it is, however, is to recognize that, hey, there is this power imbalance. More so now than before, because there was a time where, I mean, I lived through that. I'm sure Javier lived through many things like unlimited holidays, all the benefits, the office being like this fantastic party space like place. You can work from home or remote, nobody's checking in. The situation is very far from that. Maybe there's still those companies, but is it going to be a minority? So what I'm here to say that recognizing the situation we are in is at least going to help each individual to take it less personally, be more solution oriented and say like, hey, I am clearly being challenged. I will distinguish between what's within our control and what's not within my control, within our control. And I'll understand that this is the ecosystem, which itself, once again, will reduce a lot of guilt and shame and feeling like that Javier's example. No, I need to get some training on productivity and whatnot. Like you can still do those things, but recognize that like this is the game we are playing. And the other bit is like, maybe this is one way to say no, but maybe less about pushing back aggressively and more about really prioritizing and being able to focus on impact-oriented tasks and indeed worrying less about making other things perfect, because no organization is worrying too much about UXers' job satisfaction, helping with the ways of working. Why should you care like your life depends on it, on that organization's performances? I know maybe what I'm saying is quite radical, but I'm talking about being very pragmatic and
no, you're absolutely right. And you're absolutely right. But before you answer, Javier, it's about the craft. The craft is about being, the craft has always been about designing the right solution first. And then obviously the pixel perfectness is part of that. It's the part of the whole conglomerate of being a designer, I think. And that was really where my question was going. Are we going to lose the quality of the craft? You know, that are we heading down that direction? Now, Javier, I can see you want to answer.
So, I mean, I agree with what Meltem said, and I want to add that. So, I'm in my work as a coach, I focus on things people can control, right? And so, I totally understand that saying no and working less, having less perfectionism in your work, right? They are obviously things that you need to do if the company puts too much stuff on your plate and wants you to move forward too quickly, right? Now, in an ideal world, UXers would be enabled to go and say, like, we are working on too many things, right? As a company, we need to remove things like the VP did, right? Then I don't have to say no, right? But that's not the reality. So at the end, you need to focus on what you can control. And it's right. The job market situation is difficult. So people have to navigate how much and how do they say no. But I do think, so I work a lot with people on learning how to say no, right? And it starts with a very, very simple thing. I asked them to say no, right? Just say it, right? Just say no. It's not that difficult, right? And then we look into examples of others who say no in the cross-functional ecosystem of product development, right? And who says no all the time? PMs and engineers.
Yes.
They say no all the time, and they are not afraid to lose their job. Why not? Because it's part of their culture to say no, right? You will always have 200 things you need to do, 200 features you need to work on, and you know you cannot do them all, right? So you will prioritize and you will say, these are the 10 features we will work on. Everything else we will not do. And then if you come and you go like, we actually need to do this, they will go like, no, it's not on the priority. That's it, right? So they are good with that. We have role models. Why are we not good in that as UXers? Because we're people. Right? We care about people. We care about users. We care about quality, right? These are things that are in our craft, right? We want to have delightful products. We don't want to have good enough, right? We want to really have good things, right? And so it is against our nature to say no. It is against our nature to say it's good enough. Let's ship it, even if you're ashamed that you know it's not really good, right? And so these things are things that we, at this time at least, we need to work on as UXers to relax a little, right? To say, hey, we have a finite amount of hours. We will say no to things, right? And practice that. And every time I managed to get people to say more of that, they were surprised by how little pushback and how little reactions they got from cross-functional stakeholders, because they would say, yeah, all right, of course, yeah, you can't do that. You're only one person. So of course you can't design these 10 things, right? So the pushback is a lot less than people fear. And the same for when something isn't perfect, right? You notice because you care. Most people don't.
I'm going to backtrack on what you just mentioned. Do you think it's down to design leaders to have the ability to say no on the behalf of their team? Now, you mentioned people should say no. And Mel just mentioned, hey, when you're a junior and you're starting off, you're going to say yes to everything because you don't want to lose your job. Is it coming down to the fact that we have poor design leaders who can't stick up for team members, who don't have the ability to protect their teams, and not taking the responsibility of saying no, which then trickles down to PMs and developers going directly to juniors or the lower level team and pressure them? What's your take?
Yes, I do think we have not, I don't know the quantity, but we do have design leaders that are not shit umbrellas. Right. I think a good leader, a good manager of people, their job is to be a shit umbrella, right?
Yes.
You need to keep away shit from your people so they can do their work, which means you need to be able to stand up in front of your cross-functional leads meeting, the planning meeting, and say like, no, we cannot take on all this work because we don't have enough design cycles. We don't have enough research cycles, right? This is what we can offer, right? And if we want to move something additional on the plate, something needs to move off, right?
Yes.
If you have a leader who doesn't do that and just goes to the junior and goes like, these are the 10 things you need to do, right? Of course, the junior will try to do it because yes, they're junior and yes, they want to keep their job, right? So they will then move into the direction of a burnout with all the combinations we've discussed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because of that. But then, yes, you didn't do a good job as a leader to do that. Now, I want to caveat that our research also showed that the people that run the most into a burnout are actually the middle managers, right? Are the ones that are more senior. Because what they are getting is they're getting the pressure from up above, then they're trying to be a shit umbrella, right? So if they're doing a good job, they're trying to be a shit umbrella. So they get all the pressure from above while they need to keep their team together in times of reorgs, of layoffs, of strategy changes, of resource constraints, right? So they're trying to keep them together, take all that pressure, right? While they're taking all the pressure from above and they crack. And so that population was the one with the highest burnout rates. It's not the junior ones, right? Which we would think, oh, they don't know how to cope with that.
Exactly.
No, it's actually the experienced ones who just crack because it's too much for them because they're getting pressure from everywhere and they have no support to deal with it.
To be clear, what we are referring to with Javier is senior folks. They could be senior ICs, like staff UX designer, that might not have a headcount, and yet they are the figure that the entire UX team is looking up on, or people in managerial positions. But yeah, absolutely. The senior folks are the ones that need to protect the team emotionally, build the context, and them saying no is a good example for more junior folks to gain legitimacy and say, okay, such and such said it. It also will then allow me to be able to also stand up. But yeah, I also recognize that without much support, this is also very hard across the seniority levels without the support that even the senior ones need.
You know, I'm not surprised that your report brought that out. It's one of the biggest things I've actually spoken about on the podcast many, many times. People think being a design leader, and there's a difference. There is a difference between a manager and a leader. My personal belief is that to be a design leader, it is not an easy job at all. Everyone thinks you're delegating to tell what people do, and most of the time, it's as put it, you're a shit umbrella. You're having to deal with a lot of stuff coming from the top and protecting. Job as a leader is to protect the team to not see any of that shit. You know, they're meant to see just bright rain or just clear water and not the shit that comes from the top. A lot of people get miseducated to know what is actually a design leader and what is meant to be a good design leader, in my opinion. So I'm really glad your report kind of found those stuff out because it's not easy. I've been doing it for a long time and it is not easy, you know.
No. That's
Thank
why
you
from
for
time
that.
to time we need to meet, Naz, over beers.
Yeah,
It's the only way to deal with it.
Yes, we definitely need to do this. Not just coffee, as we did last time. We'll have a proper beer.
But look, there's also something, Nas. We talk about design leaders, of course, which is what we studied. But in the group that we studied, there's also research leaders. There is also people within the broader spectrum of UX, whether they focus on content or design or research, whatnot. So what we are talking about also applies to disciplines within UX.
We looked into UX, right? So we're not, any of the claims are not about design because you come from a design angle, right? But we're talking about UX here. We have not seen any differences between different roles. So it's not, we cannot say, oh, you know, designers burn out more frequently than researchers and stuff. We haven't seen that in our data.
One of the key things is also something I went through, being my time in Switzerland, is that you interviewed someone who had survived 4 layoffs in 13 years. Now, how long have I been in Switzerland? I've been in Switzerland for 12 years now. I've been in, I would say, 6 different cycles of layoffs across all the different companies I've been in. So this range from banking all the way to insurance. I won't put the names in. But 6 different types of layoffs or reorgs, reshuffling that did end up in layoffs. I think I've took a note here. One left to become a therapist. So from what I took a note on. Now, do you think in this field, and let's be realistic, because a lot of people who do listen to the show range from all the way from junior all the way to directors. Do you think it's just going to be a common norm that we're just going to be? I know you mentioned earlier, we hope things die down or get stable, but do you think in a career, in being in the design field, layoffs are going to be part of your career lifetime? What's your take?
I think the only way that layoffs will so right now layoffs are part of tech.
Yes.
And companies in tech show zero desire to change that. Right. So it's not even a stated goal or anything. It's just the norm. Right. And that was not the case in the past. The only way for us to go to a place where people feel secure again for their jobs would be to stop that behavior. And simply put, I don't think companies have any incentives to do that, because if they lay off a lot of people constantly, it's this rolling grinder of people being put on the market. You have too many people on the market, which makes hiring a lot easier, and you can bring salaries down. You can lay off senior people that have maybe a lot of stock and higher salaries because they have been in the company for more years. You wipe that out, then you hire someone and you lower their base salary by 10% at least, because there's so many people on the market, right? There's a lot of competition going on. So if you have maybe 5 people who want that job, so you just lower the salary, somebody will say yes. So you move the salary down. So the only way for companies to stop doing that would be if that changes. And right now, I don't see an incentive. It might change in the future again once the AI madness is over. Who knows? But right now, I think we're in this, and that means that if you want to work in tech, you need. I say that, and I have LinkedIn posts about that. It's not a matter of if; it's a matter of when.
When
you need to embrace that you will be laid off. It's a fact. It will happen, likely more than once, right? And you need to be prepared for that. So you need to have your house in order, all your resume, your portfolio in place. You need to be up to date when it comes to interviewing. You need to be constantly interviewing. You need to send in every month a couple of resumes to jobs, even if you don't want them, just to be warm, because you will be laid off. And if that happens, you're ready, right? You have a plan in place. If by now, if you get laid off, you're surprised and you're like, oh, what should I do now? I don't want to blame you because I don't believe in blame, but like you could have done differently, right? It's not the same as if you were in 22, 23, when you were living in the bubble at where it's like we're this perfect company where the company appreciates us as the workforce and they know we're their most important asset. That's no longer the case. People at Google know that the company no longer appreciates them, right? So if you don't prepare for that, well, then you'll just have a hard time figuring out what to do in that situation.
I love Javier's face.
No, just before you're going to answer, I know, because before you're going to answer on that a bit, the reason why I asked that question is because right now, people who come into this field, and I've said it many, many times, they're not getting shown the real thing. They're getting shown on social media that, oh, you get to make all this fancy stuff and you get to do all this really cool stuff. But really and truly, when you come into this field, you have to be a negotiator. You need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to bring people together. You need to be able to deal with pushback. You need to be able to, negotiate your designs. You need to be able to present. You need to be able to know technical stuff. The number of requirements that are coming into this field are just growing by the minute. And now, if you think about what Javier has just mentioned, on top of that, on upskilling yourself, trying to push yourself inside the career ladder, you're also having to plan your exit strategy. Do you know what I mean? So there's more and more requirements on us within this design field than just making something beautiful. Mel, I know you wanted to tie up on our answer. Do you have anything to add to what Javier said?
Yeah, definitely. Well, there isn't anything I disagree, only that I want to emphasize one thing that I think can be further emphasized. I have a strong reason to believe that what we're experiencing in tech right now is not coincidental. There is actually some interviews by tech CEOs, I won't mention any names, that they're saying it's very intentional, that despite being profitable, despite everything going well, they're doing layoffs and reorgs and all that because they want to keep the workforce humble. Unlike how things were in 2020 and earlier, where you feel like, okay, working in tech in itself is a privilege compared to non-tech jobs with unlimited holidays and very high salaries and freedom and the flexibility of working and the work culture and so on. So long gone are the days. Will they come back? Maybe, but what we're experiencing is not, once again, a coincidence. It's quite intentional. This is how the power dynamic, I'm not going to go into Foucault or anything, but it seems to be where we are now. So indeed, I don't disagree. I think it's important to be able to network. That's only one thing I didn't hear from Javier, which I really want to add, because you can have the best CV in the world. You can be applying to multiple jobs any given month. But if you're not networking, if you're not really connecting with people in the industry, outside of the industry, and so on, it's going to be harder for you to get that referral. It's going to be harder for you to build a relationship where you're going to be one of the first applicants. And yeah, this is very, very, very important. You might be very proud of where you're working now, but they don't necessarily share the same pride for any given employee. So it's important to be able to diversify, to share your thought, your thought process with people outside of your organization to increase your chances of flexibility, of adaptation, of going into elsewhere if and when it's needed.
The reason why I made that comment about, okay, you're having to do so much, you're having to learn so much, you're having to do, again, that list piles up more and more as the months have gone on or the years have gone on. Since I started this, the first episode of this podcast to here, the requirement of having to learn so much is becoming a burden. Have you found in your studies that people are burning out by having to try to keep themselves upskilled and up to date and, keep looking in the market to make sure there's an exit strategy? Doesn't that also add into that kind of burnout aspect?
I think in our study, this is all summarized in the layoffs and job insecurity bucket, right? So we have not found it, also not in the comments and the open-ended comments that people have named this regularly as a thing. They are talking a lot about the impact of layoffs, both if they were impacted, but also if they were not impacted, because it's actually pretty awful for people who are not impacted by layoffs, but half of their team is gone, half of their cross-functional partners are gone. They work on something new. They have a new manager. Everything is unclear. And when things start to become clear, there's another layoff, and it happens again and again, right? And so that is all in that bucket. And but the having to upskill is not something that came up as a separate thing in the study.
Okay. I love that you just mentioned that, because everyone thinks about the burnout happening to people that get laid off, or that kind of depression aspect that is associated with burnout. They always think it's always going to happen to the people who've been let go, but it also has a detrimental effect of the people who are still there. As you just mentioned, you've been working with a team for like 5-6 years, and all of a sudden they're gone without hesitation. Did your studies find anything out about that? How people can deal with the loss of their team members or the loss of their structure that they had in their companies? Mel?
What we've found out, and I'm going to be particularly referring to some of the interviews, it would definitely have this impact on the erosion of meaning. That's the part, is that, of course, there's the emotional part, no? Like my colleagues, they're gone. I might also be gone. There is that changes in the environment. But more importantly, what people are referring to, like, what am I going to aim for? I'm now covering for, we used to be a team of 6 and now I'm alone. And our targets keep on changing. Our goals are just, not fixed enough for me to aim towards them. Like, I'm working on something right now. I don't know if it's going to be relevant tomorrow because the PM who gave me that work, maybe they're going to be gone tomorrow, and the person that's going to replace them or not, maybe this is not going to be their priority. So people are ending, I'm talking about those that are still in the organization. The colleagues are gone. You're worried about them. You're worrying about what that means for you to stay. You now have an increased workload, bigger scope to manage, but you don't know if any of that will be relevant the next day because of all these dependencies. So I'm talking about shift and lack of focus, lack of clarity, lack of orientation, and total chaos to the degree that people are beginning to disconnect, So that's indeed something we've explored.
And to add to this, it's very difficult for people to deal with that because the job insecurity that is connected with people being laid off in your team and you knowing, oh, I could be next, right, is eroding psychological safety. Because from a construct perspective, so we know that one of the most important things in teams and for workplaces is psychological safety. There's a lot of research showing what impact psychological safety has. You can take risks. Like if you do a mistake, you can learn from that. You will not be penalized. You could bring your whole self to work, right? And that way, diverse perspectives can be brought into product development, which is enriching and leads to highly performant teams. Now, psychological safety stands upon job safety. There's no way somebody can feel psychologically safe if they don't feel their job is safe. And why is that? If I make a mistake, right, and I don't feel secure for my job, I will be afraid that I will lose my job, right? And that we have seen, like with people saying, like, I'm no longer willing to take a risk because if I take it, like, I might be laid off. And this goes into extremes where there's people who don't want to use the conference budget because they feel, oh, if I take the conference budget, maybe my employer thinks I don't have enough work. And so when layoffs come, they will pick me. That is obviously ridiculous because there's no layoff that where such a thoughtful approach would be chosen. But I really, when people are being laid off, that's just a spreadsheet and people who don't know you just cross out numbers, right? This is not, nobody looks into your performance and goes like, oh, that last research report was really poor, right? So we're going to lay off this person. None of that ever happens, right? It's always very depersonalized at a very high level, and has nothing to do with performance. But because you don't have job security, you don't have psychological safety, right? Now, every decision becomes a potential risk for you losing your job. So the erosion of job security led to a complete and utter destruction of psychological safety, right? And there's not much people can do about that because the only way to have job safety is by the employer saying, we will not lay off people. And if they don't say that, right, you will not have job safety. You will not have psychological safety. So the only thing you can do is to prepare yourself for when it happens, right? That's what I tell people. It's like, I wish I could give you a recipe on how to make this all right. You lost half your team. You're sad, right? You don't know how things will continue. I wish I have a magic wand like Harry Potter and make it nice, but I can't, right? What you can do is prepare for the steps that will come when you're laid off, right? Take control over what you can control and focus on that.
I love that bit. I absolutely love that bit because you're absolutely right. You need to prepare, and it ties back to that whole thing that was just mentioned before. You always got to have an exit strategy. And yeah, really, I think, it'll be a bit presumptuous to not think that your job isn't not in line if you're seeing your team members being let go. So I'm really glad you mentioned that.
Can I ask something, Naz? You always say "let go," which I don't know.
I listened to this many times, but you're right. Go for it.
I don't know how they manipulated us to say it that way. But saying let go sounds like the employer is doing something nice to you. I let you go. You have
Or
you
like
have
you're
my
trying to
permission.
leave and they let you go. Like
Exactly. You
I
have
was
my permission. Oh, you want to go? I
Wow.
let you go,
like,
right?
let you go.
Yeah,
You need no permission to leave your workplace. You can just leave it, and they're not letting you go. They're actually laying you off or firing you. They're giving you the boot. They're putting you on the street. Whatever they're doing, it's not nice,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I
Let
don't know.
go is really,
Yeah, it's a very English terminology that we use.
I know.
You know,
Somehow they manipulate it into that, but I
But
don't
there
think
is
it's
that-
okay.
I love it. No, I'm glad you corrected me. And yeah, it's you're right. It's kicking you out on the street. They fired you. And I'm really glad you corrected me on that. Because you're absolutely right. You've taken away my ability to support my family, my ability of my livelihood, and you've just basically just thrown me on the street. So thank you, Javier, for that one.
I love that we had this conversation on a tram in Austria, on a flight, everywhere. This is so real.
I always call it out. Yeah.
I think it's helpful because indeed now
It's
that
brilliant.
you said it, let go does sound like I genuinely want to leave. Like, don't hold me against my will. I was like, okay, I let you go. Like, as if I'm the origin, like I'm the one who wants to leave in the first place, and you let me go as a response to my initial willingness to leave. It's really not like that. My personal take is where, okay, it's no longer like in the earlier generations where the organization is like a parent that is responsible for loving and caring unconditionally the employees. There was a business need, there's a business need, and that's why we hired. And it could be not like a conflict of interest, but I can definitely embrace the fact that, look, we no longer have the business needs today that we had in the past that led us to do this hiring, but indeed it can be done more ethically. The situation can be arranged with a much better language, considering the needs and necessities of the employees. It can definitely be done. So I'm coming from a perspective where, of course, like I get it that we might not operate with full certainty that we're not going to retire from the organization that hired us in the first place. Like, I get it. But at the same time, especially for those that are not living in Germany or not living in countries where, legally speaking, because the state understood that there is this power imbalance between the employer and employee, and the state comes in to help the weak legally, it's great. But places like the US, it's really the opposite. Spain is obviously somewhere in the middle where we don't have the same privileges as more northern European countries. Maybe Switzerland is an exception. I later found out about that from Javier.
We have no protection.
I get that. That's
almost
crazy.
like the US.
Yeah, we have
that's
zero
so
protection.
crazy. So crazy. Like, so we have, but the whole point of it all is like, I get it, but still, you know, it can be done a little better. But hey, whoever's going to listen to this, most likely they have no control to change that system, but you can still look out for yourself and for your community.
Something which is natural because of the situation of the discipline and the industry right now, but we completely deviated away from talking about burnout to talking about layoffs.
Whoa, no.
It was enough.
But it's part and part. It's part and part.
Of course, it's part
It's
of
part
it.
and part. Because I think, you know, the reason why I deviated to that is because most people associate the burnout with the layoff, with the firing aspect. You know,
Okay, we started. Yeah,
it's always a misconception that most people, and you know, people who let me say are not in the field or hear about burnout in some sense, they always associate most of it with, oh, you got fired, or you're looking for a job, or you know, you don't have the ability to support your family, which is a very, very massive psychological stress. But as mentioned, and I'm glad you brought this up in the study, burnout is not only just associated with being fired or looking for a job. It is also a big factor being in this industry and being in a job.
Yes.
So in both areas, you can have burnout in both sectors. Even if you're happy in your job, you're working in your job, you've been in your job for 5-6 years, blah, 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 you are just as likely to get burnout as somebody who doesn't have a job. And that's what was my whole point with this. You're not safe just because you're taking in a paycheck and you'll be able to support your family. Great. You can still get burnout, you know?
Yeah, you don't know for how long. And
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
there
That's
is that
correct.
uncertainty, and there's also the ways of working, the erosion of meaning, and the way that you're not being supported, even if you are tasked to do a lot of work with limited resources, work under pressure.
Mm-hmm.
That is very clear. One thing we haven't said it so far over this hour, and I think it's important to say it proactively. Also, the language we're using so far regarding burnout is almost as though like you either have it or you don't. You risk it or you don't. But we also recognize that there's major differences between the spectrum of burnout, where people have mild burnout. We also done a lot of work around what helps some people have mild burnout but not go to the extremes, or those that are hospitalized. They really ended up in the emergency room, and they really were, the doctor had to like make it clear that they no longer can sustain what they're doing. So it's also important to introduce a language where we can understand burnout as a spectrum. So it's not like yes or no, you have it or not, but it's actually something that develops very gradually before you're even aware that what's happening is a burnout. And there's people with better mechanisms and more empowerment and awareness that don't go to the extremes. And there's unfortunately people that do.
And there's people that flip-flop around, right? So it moves across. It's developmental, and it's not like you have it or you don't have it, or you have it and then it's gone, right? You can go back and forth depending on what happens in your life.
The reason why I kind of mentioned this whole thing about layoffs, and if you look at why I'm going with this conversation, everything is always connected back to the fact of this field. Being that I'm biased, I've been in this field throughout my whole career. And we just mentioned, hey, you know, product managers and developers are taught to say no. They're not given the pressure of XYZ. In this field, it's a very, very highly pressured job. Now, when you buy a pack of cigarettes, you know, it comes with a health warning. It says, if you smoke, you keep smoking, you're going to die, or blah, blah, blah. It's very, very, you should see some of the packets in Switzerland. They go very, very deep. It comes onto my whole thing. Do you think that we should educate people on the risks in taking this type of career? Because again, when you buy cigarettes, you get told health hazard. If you drink too much, you know that you have a health hazard. If you come as a UXer, these are the things you need to expect in your career. Do you think we don't do a good job in telling the health risk of being in this field? And that's why we're leading to a lot of burnout happening. What's your take on this?
My quick and while I was going to say while Javier is thinking, because he seemed to have engaged in
he
process.
You know when you come on my podcast, I love to ask questions. So
that I also love. I have to say that because we're also friends. I love now. So we're like, you ask these deliberate questions, we answer, and your response like, well, the reason why I asked.
you know me. I loved. You know, it's not a podcast unless I have to play devil's advocate. You know me being that I've been in this field. I can't just be one side, but I also have to balance it with another side. And, you know, that question is a very, very hard question, but I want to get your take on it. Do you think we're not doing a good job in educating people who are coming in on the risk factors of now?
My take was I was about to say is that, in my opinion, until or unless something fundamental changes, long gone are the days where the boot camps are making a lot of revenue, bringing people in like, this is amazing, your life is going to change. You just do this course for like 10 weeks and then you're going to have this amazing salary, work standards. It's gone. And it's gone because those juniors come in, there's no work. Even more senior people are having hard time after layoff, and so on. So indeed, it seems clear that maybe the cigarette example is maybe too extreme, but it is indeed true that you need to have that inner motivation. What I also like to tell my coaching clients, for example, is to think of their UX careers as a marathon and not a sprint. Because you might have a promotion, have a great opportunity, then do something else and be laid off and go. You just have to be relentless. You have to keep going, recognizing the challenges out there is an important one. So I was thinking through in our previous conversation too, where when Javier gave us great example of the working culture for engineers, for PMs, and how saying no is in the DNA. And I feel like maybe the opposite is true, not only because we're, we are very empathic and we like to work with people, but also because we are taught since the beginning is to lead through influence, not so much with authority. Like as a UX researcher, since the beginning, I'm talking about like over 10 years ago, and when we were working, we were always taught that, okay, the work that we were going to do was going to de-risk the engineering time so that the engineers don't waste their time building things that are no longer necessary. So the engineers themselves didn't have to deal with these sort of decisions. They already worked with relevant material, or so they thought, that would have the impact, so they didn't have to prove themselves as hard as we did. And so I'm thinking that it's important to have a nuanced approach. It's important to recognize that there's so many joys in what we do because we are at intersections of many different disciplines. We are very close to users. We are close to the business. We work with engineers, product, business, like so many things. But indeed, there will be some hard moments, and we'll need to be able to have an intrinsic motivation to pursue what we're doing.
So a couple of things. First of all, it's important to mention we have not studied burnout for PMs, engineers, or others. So we cannot say that there's more burnout for UX than other disciplines. I want to be careful that the readers, your listeners, don't take away that message. Second is, I also want to be careful to not try to state that we're like poor UXers. We have it so much worse than others, right? There are many jobs out there with health risks, right?
More than UX.
Exactly. If we stay on the more intellectual level, if you go to, become a doctor or a nurse or you go into finance, become in banking, right? There's high stress too. But then there's obviously, like, if you go and work for in a mine, right? Like so we don't have the hardest jobs in the world, right? And should we have a health warning? I think I like to rephrase that a little bit in a sense that should you have serious information about the downsides of professions before you study it, 100%. And that is not only for UX, right? So if I just go through that with my son now, right? He's looking into different directions to study jobs and so on, right? And when we look at those things, they only tell you the good stuff. The only way you can find out about the bad stuff is you find somebody working in this and you go like, can we have a coffee? Right? So, can you tell me about the bad stuff? Because they advertise the jobs, and the same is for psychology. If you study psychology, nobody tells you in the beginning, hey, when you're finished and if you want to become a therapist, after studying, you will have to actually learn how to become a therapist. That takes 5 years, costs you $60,000, right? So you understand, like, that's not what they advertise. So in that sense, I think for all jobs, we should have pros and cons being told before you take a conscious and informed decision to do that. And for UX, yes, that can mean you're being told that while on paper and in ad videos, it sounds great, like you're defining the product direction, defining how people will see and experience everything, right? That in reality, this is all a negotiation, and it will lead with a lot of frustration and ambiguities and alignment and politics and all these things. Absolutely, we should tell them, but I don't think this is something that is only important for UX.
No, I think you make a good point. Every job has its own stress, but I think it's not saying the risk or being real. It's more about being real. It's about being realistic about the position. A lot of people who I've spoken to said, I've come into this field and I'm doing like PowerPoint slides and I'm doing presentations on this, and I'm like, well, that's part of the job. Do you know what I mean? What you're seeing on social media is just like 2%. The other 70% is like speaking and talking, and they're like, but I didn't sign up for this. Nobody told me this. And then, we're only just talking about the job aspect. I think understanding that, or understanding, as you just mentioned, the bit of getting pushback? What do you do about pushback? What do you do about when the project pivots, or when you're not being heard, or your erosion of identity or work goes down and you're not seeing value? Those are the things I'm kind of mentioning about the health risks, just real talk that's happening in this field and how to deal with it, how to manage it. And I think that's what we're lacking.
I think we can put a name to it, right? You don't learn any soft skills in your trainings.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Only hard skills. You learn how to design, how to make research, right? How to plan, execute, deliver it. You learn how to, write, like writing or whatever it is. You learn the hard skills, the method, what you need to apply. You do not learn anything about the soft skills needed to make product development happen, right? And should we do that in training? Absolutely. I think we should have a lot more of that. In my teams, I did regular trainings to my teams about giving and receiving feedback. Like one of the most impactful trainings I have done in my career, right? And it's kind of funny because giving and receiving feedback should be something you have learned when you were a kid. Right? You were a kid and then, you get frustrated about something and you slap your friend in the face, and then your mom comes and goes like, no, you don't slap people in the face, right? It's like if you're frustrated about something, here's how you do it, right? But we don't learn how to do that in a work context. And so there's a lot of that is missing that I agree we could build into our UX curricula, where you say okay, there's going to be a course about how to deal with ambiguities, right? That is something that happens all the time. You don't learn that in university.
Mel, you're on mute in a minute.
Yeah, I was in the... no, that's definitely clear. And add to that, this isn't even a question for juniors. I think even people that are, way ahead of their careers, a group that I work closely with in my coaching practice are those that have been senior ICs and they transition to leadership. Now they're responsible for a team, which requires them to have the soft skills that they never necessarily had to have at that level when they were, an individual contributor. So the kind of soft skills that need to be there are important to deal with burnout, like our original topic, are important to have that, like job satisfaction, to deliver impact. All those things are absolutely necessary, as our research shown, no, Javier? Because the more senior you get, the greater the risk of burnout, the greater the shit umbrella you were saying, right? Like that sort of thing. Your umbrella grows, the scope of your umbrella widens. So these are indeed important across the seniority levels and spectrums for sure.
Javier, you mentioned, I think a couple of questions back about the psychological safety that needs to happen in jobs. And I think with layoffs and everything happening, I know I mentioned about layoffs quite a bit, but, a lot of people who tend to have burnouts, do suffer from, not suffer. I'm going to rephrase it in a better way. A lot of people who do burnout have neurodivergence, and neurodivergence do cause people to overthink a lot of things, and that does end up in some form of burnout, from just my experience of working with people who were neurodivergent. Now, your study, and I'll quote this, you documented that neurodivergent UXers reporting skill regression during burnout. What did that mean?
So when before I go into the answer, be clear, our study did not focus on neurodivergent. It is a random finding that we stumbled upon because many people, especially in the open-ended comments, left comments about their neurodivergence and how it impacted their burnout, right? So we cannot say that neurodivergent people burn out more frequently or anything like that. We have no numbers for that, right? But what came out is that neurodivergence is a factor that is like an additional burden for people in those situations where they experience an erosion of meaning, lack of management support, right? Reorgs, layoffs, unclear roles, all these kind of things, right? And now you also have to deal with neurodivergence, right? Meaning that you have I mean, I can say this so because I have a lot, like my daughter is neurodivergent, so she's autistic. So I have a lot of experience with that, right? She needs to put a lot of energy into trying to fit into a neurotypical world. Like she even says it that way, right? It's like, I have to put a lot of energy to make other people feel I'm like them, right? Because if they realize I'm not like them, right, they feel awkward. Okay, so neurodivergent people have to put a lot of energy into that. For an easy example to understand it, although that's just one example, is stimming, right? Stimming is an activity that some neurodivergent people do, especially on the spectrum. That is, you might have seen it, like people moving their hands like that, like and it's kind of like a reaction they do to like blow off some energy they have in them in that situation, right? And a lot of energy goes into preventing that in the work context, because you don't want to be in a meeting with your VP and you're stimming, right? You know this will be weird. People will perceive you as like, what is that person doing? So you put a lot of energy into that. Now, when you are in a burnout, right? In a burnout type, mild or medium, like whatever, in a burnout state, a lot of energy you need to use to cope with a situation of burnout, and you lose the capacity of controlling the stimming. So suddenly in work context, you start to stim. And that is something very uncomfortable for people, right? Or they have certain skills in communication with others, right? Like in typical classic, like socially acceptable communication with others, right? Because they don't communicate the same way as neurotypical ones, but they can mimic it because they can put energy into that. But suddenly, because of the burnout, they lose those skills. And that's what people reported in the study, where they said, like, if neurodivergent people burn out, they lose skills. And that can be really scary. Suddenly you're not able to do what you were able to do before because of the burnout, right? And that is kind of an area that the research found needs just more research. We need to understand how the factors of neurodivergence and burnout, how they correlate, how they influence each other, to come up with better approaches for leaders and companies to support their neurodivergent workforce.
Amazing. I never even knew that. And
we didn't either.
It's an amazing find, and I can't express how important that is, because a lot of people, in my time being in this field, I have worked with, I would say 7 out of 10 of the people I've worked with had some form of neurodivergence, and obviously the spectrum varies for everyone, but it attracts a lot of people into this field because it's a very creative field, and neurodivergent people love this type of field because it's a creativity that gets their energy flowing. And, that's why it's an important find in your study. I'm glad you both pointed that out. Mel, do you want to chime in on that one?
No, I mean, Javier did a great job in mentioning that. We even had a conversation after releasing our report and doing our presentation. So there really needs to be a part 2 of our study where we focus on the neurodivergent experience. Of course, one topic over in there is, if we are running a survey, imagine the number of responses we need to get to be able to stand behind our findings. But maybe just thinking out loud as an experiment, this podcast could be helpful. Who knows? Because based on the responses we get, we really want to make sure that this findings isn't like we have a checkpoint we've done, now we move on to the next thing. Burnout is still a thing. As we speak, people are being burned out. The, system is working in the ways it is doing, with the power dynamic being, the way it is. These are still our realities. So I do think that more can be done. And let's see towards which direction our community directs us.
And maybe, Naz, something to add here, which was interesting to us, because both Mel and I were very surprised when we presented this work in the conference. The first person who stood up was someone who said, "Thank you for sharing this. Thank you for putting the light on the neurodivergence piece. I am neurodivergent myself," and then explained in front of the audience how that played out. And multiple people chiming in with that. Also, when we did a webinar about that, that was the first thing people commented with. So it was for us a strong sign. There is actually this awareness and frustration in the neurodivergent community, like if you want to call it that way, that this is something important that nobody talks about and nobody understands. Yeah. And that was kind of like the sign for us to, okay, like this is something we might need to look into more deeply in the future.
I've got one last question to ask you both, and I've wrote it down as I wanted to make sure that I get it right with this one. And you mentioned that the top 5 contributing factors that happen with burnout goes around these reorganization, lack of support, role ambiguity, stakeholder management, and lack of recognition. Now, we just mentioned about explaining about the health risk or the risks, well, not even the risk, the reality of coming into this role. Do you think by understanding this, people will start to build some form of personal resilience, which would then help them in their career not to burn out? What's your take on this?
I think it's similar to what we discussed before, right? There's 2 sides of the coin, right? Yes, this is part of UX work, and you should be prepared for that. You should learn how to deal with it. You should, it's like what one of my researchers once said, oh no, now I got a new PM, and this PM never worked with UX before. Now I need to explain them again, right? And I said, I understand your frustration. It's part of your job. It's just part of your job. You will always have stakeholders who never work with UX. You will always have to explain what you do and justify your existence and so on, right? So the sooner you just embrace it, the less frustrated you will be. So it's one side where you can, okay, how do we deal with that? But then at the same time, I have to say, as an organization, can you be proud if people say, like, there's no clear organization, there is no management support, there's no clear role definitions and clear expectations. Stakeholders are not supportive, and you need to fight them all the time, and nobody recognizes you if you do good work. Can you be proud of that? Like, as an organization, if you hear that, is your answer, we need to teach people how to be resilient? Is that the answer? Or shouldn't it be, well, wait a second, if I'm the CEO of this company and there's a lack of recognition of contributions from UX, we need to fix that, right? If it's not clear what the different roles are doing and how they collaborate with each other, we need to address that, right? So it's like, and there are companies who have figured it out. So it's not like it's impossible to come up with a good working model between UX, PM, and Eng, right? It's just like, get your act together and recognize that you need to get better at that, because else, why do you have such a high salary, right? Isn't that your job, to set up your company for the future, to structure it well, to define how the different disciplines work together and so on? That's your job. Like, if you look at that and you go like, we need to teach people how to deal with the fact that their work will not be recognized. Holy crap.
No, but that's it. That's why I left it as the last question. If you think about this whole podcast, we've been talking about, we should be preparing ourselves. We should have to deal with organization, reorganization, change of this, educating people. And I'm glad you left that as the last answer. It shouldn't be the case that we have to build resilience. It should be the case that organizations need to get themselves in check to make sure the culture is built properly, and that you do have a stability in, again, recognition for your work, ability to speak up, being able to fail, to learn. We shouldn't have to teach people that basically, at 1 minute you can lose your job. Yes, you should have the realistic aspect that you are, but it really stems down to companies' culture. Companies' cultures are so toxic, and that is why it's spreading down to the people below. That's why I'm glad you left that as the last bit of the answers, because what needs to change is higher management need to see if we're human at the end of the day. Having changes is a cost. It affects people. Do you know what I mean?
This is a clear learning that we share, I want at the same time step back and hopefully face the truth in a more optimistic way, thinking out loud why I do believe that while what we're saying is very true, there's a lot that each individual in UX can do. The unfortunate situation, based on our learning and where this debate is going, is that the CEO themselves isn't being burned out for the same reasons, because they are being recognized for their work. They have the authority, they can push back, they can say no. So unfortunately, even if there are major problems with the system, it's not an individual problem, it's not a personal failure, it's a system misalignment that is causing the burnout of the UXers. While it is all true, I cannot go to my coaching clients and say that, look, you need to only work with and work for organizations where there's no such system misalignment, because then their ability to find employment might shrink. Unfortunately, I think we might have a lower capacity, Javier and I, with this work to say that, okay, with this work, we're going to guarantee that all, C-level executives will change their ways of thinking. And like, I wish that were to be true. I wish we could say that, it should be this way, then going to be like that VP at, right? Like, yeah, I'm going to remove some OKRs. Like, I wish it were to be true. So we're like, okay, even if they are a big part of the problem, because they themselves might not be facing the consequences of this problem, we ourselves, as the ones that are facing, we need to figure out what we need to do. And that's the reason why we called our work empowerment. So we are recognizing, we're diagnosing, we're observing the situation, but also we're figuring out what helps people to overcome burnout, what helps people to stop at mild burnout without going to the extreme. What are the things we can do to help ourselves? Not because this is a personal failure, not because we are the responsible ones for this to happen, but because those that are responsible for the system to misalign, I cannot give the guarantee that they're going to wake up. So I'm like, in the meanwhile, we need to be proactive. We need to do what we can.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, if any of the things that we just mentioned, please drop your comments down below in the video. Javier and Mel will definitely respond back to you. If anything has resonated with you, or any questions you want to mention to Mel and Javier, we will drop their LinkedIn profiles down below. So feel free to ask them any questions that you might have. And this actually comes to my last question. What do you suggest to people who are listening to this podcast who are experiencing some form of burnout or, symptoms that are kind of, freshening up on their burnout? What would you say to them? And is there any help out there? Before you answer your one, I think we live in a country where a lot of people in this country are very proud. They don't really speak up about their kind of issues. I think it's a Swiss culture kind of thing. They keep a lot of things to themselves. But what would you suggest to people who don't want to, or are scared to come out about are scared to admit that they're suffering from some form of burnout?
So I want to say, like, both Mel and I, we're not therapists, right? We're not experts for burnout, right? We did this study, right? So if anyone is suffering of severe burnout symptoms, we absolutely recommend them to look for professional help outside the company, not in the company, right?
Yes.
If you have a trust relationship with your manager, that can be a very good first step. I had people in my team burn out. I was part of their burnout experience, helping them to get back on track. So basically helping them leave, take care of themselves, come back, slow roll up again, and so on, right? But I also really cared about those topics, right? So I didn't tell people, toughen up, man, you can't work, right? Some managers do that. So look for help where you can find it. I think it's extremely important. I know it's sometimes scary, but if there's one thing you learn from our work, is there's many out there, right? You're not alone. There's no reason to be ashamed, right? What you're going through is something many people experience, and especially in these times. So look for help so you can get better. Okay. That's one thing. The other thing is what our research work showed is that people who don't go to the extremes, Mel mentioned it before, like people who who have these extreme burnout symptoms, they obviously when they have that, they engage in reactive strategies to try to bring it down. People who do not go to the extremes, they apply more preventative strategies. And so some of them are personal projects outside of work, things that are meaningful to you outside of work, that give you strength, that give you meaning in that time of chaos, right? Where you can leave the chaos in the office. You're like, okay, this is all ambiguous and all crazy and reorgs and layoffs and whatever, right? But I will go do this other thing I love. Then obviously setting boundaries is another thing, like being better in saying no, logging off, leaving the laptop at work, not answering the phones, these kind of not being online all the time, which I understand is scary in a time of layoffs. But believe me, nobody is going to check how often you were online to decide if you're laid off or not. That's simply not a thing. It's a lot of other things that decide if you're laid off, and the most likely is your salary. And how much money they can save with that, right? And then exercise, regular exercise, like walking, gym, physical health is super important in this context. These are things that people who did not go to the extreme burnout told us that helped them a lot to prevent them to going through these extremes. Mel, you're muted.
Yeah.
Intentionally muted. Very.
Why do you speak?
It's really funny. Later, I'll tell you because, those that are listening to us, well, actually, Naz has kids. Javier has adolescent kids. I have, well, not toddler anymore, but still like a 3-year-old, 5-year-old. So some of my muted interventions were not for the audience, but for the internal audience. To avoid some burnout here. That is also important. So everything Javier said was a great summary of the things that we've learned. I really like the word that popped up in our study, which was anchoring, because I haven't met a single UXer part of the study that didn't care enough about what they've done. We clearly are intrinsically motivated and also extrinsically, but we care about what we do beyond the performance review. We care about the value of our collaborations. We care about the outputs, but at the same time, it's ever more important to have things that you care about outside of work. No matter how much you like to research or design or whatever you're doing at whatever capacity, IC or managerial, you need to have things that help you value your time, help you give some kind of identity that is beyond your professional identity. That is extremely important. So your unique sense of value doesn't come from your profession, although you obviously love what you do. That was an important thing that I really wanted to say, everyone, on top of what Javier said. And yeah, basically realize that if you ever burn out, because I'm inclined to think that just like what we said before, like layoff is a thing, it'll happen sooner or later. Maybe you might also experience either a full-blown burnout or symptoms of it, that you're not alone. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not because you don't know what you're doing. So there is nothing, you'll deal with burnout if that happens. I hope it doesn't, but it could, as we are discussing. But also it's worth not dealing with guilt and shame on top of it, recognizing that this is also about the system and not only about your productivity and time management.
Love it. Really great answers. Really, really great answers. And, I can't thank you enough for both of you coming on the show. Javier, you have this thing about dragging on my podcast for a very, very long time. I think last time you came on, it was an hour and a half as well. So, yeah, you have this ability.
Does that
happen? What's next? What is next in line for this presentation, this PowerPoint, this study? What is in plan for both of you?
We're publishing this article on UX trends, so we'll share it on LinkedIn once it's out there. It's going to be in January, and then Mel and I have to decide if we want to do a follow-up study or if focused on neurodivergence or not. It's a question also about time, right? Nobody's paying us for that. So we're doing this out of our free time. So we will have to decide that and then see if there's any other ways we share this work, but your podcast is an important element in us sharing this. So thanks for giving us this platform so we can share this to the world and let people know about their findings.
Definitely. Just extremely special that this is the last episode and we're here. And for those of you who might not know, even when the study was ongoing with the interviews and later survey, we were in touch with Naz and he was extremely supportive because he knows what it takes to do this kind of long-term projects. He cares about the community. So I'll also say thanks, Naz, for having us. And this is a collaborative effort. I mean, we've done what we've done, which I am very humbly proud that it brought value. We definitely were surprised by some of our learnings, but the rest could be also collaborative. I mean, I would love for Javier and us to do workshops in organizations that care about the topics that we discuss, because some leaders do care. I'm still optimistic. It's not only, those slightly negative examples. We're definitely interested in more collaborations with folks that may want to have some other coaching engagements or otherwise. It's really open. Like we discussed in neurodiverse bit, there could be more research done too. So let's see. But a lot of it will also probably depend on the reactions we get and where might be the biggest need and urgency.
Wow, I didn't even know that. You're doing this all for free. And
yeah,
that's such
who do you think pays us?
No, it's such an honorable thing to do. How can I end this? It's such an important subject that's happening right now. And I'm glad that both of you have taken it upon yourselves to jump on the bandwagon and bring it to fruition. It is a taboo subject. It is a non-spoken subject. It is also a subject that is very, very important being in this field. And I'm glad that both of you have took the reins in it. And I can't thank you enough for actually coming on to the show and speaking about it. I always love to have you both on the show, but it's a very great subject that you two are doing, and to do it for free is just showing that you are helping the community. You've got your intentions right, and I do hope to see more that comes out of this. And I think you've just scratched the surface on where you're going to end up with it. So thank you to both of you, really.
Thanks for having us. And maybe if we have more material, we can convince you to do another podcast in the future. Come back,
let's see.
Come back, nothing's forever.
Yeah, that's true. Nothing is forever. I like that. But
and let's face it, Naz, you're enjoying it too much. That's
the thing. I've enjoyed it too much. I think I've got to stop. I have to stop before the party burns out. So no pun intended. So yeah, thank you, Javier. Thank you, Mel.